The collective had existed for over 10,000 years. Their civilization stretched across 12 star systems, and their ships traveled through the dark spaces between worlds with grace and purpose. They were scholars, scientists, and diplomats. They had made contact with 47 different species across the galaxy. They believed they understood the universe and its many inhabitants. They were wrong about one species in particular. Ambassador stood at the observation window of Harmony Point Station, watching the stars drift slowly past. Her scales shimmered in shades of deep blue and silver, reflecting the distant light of a nearby nebula. She had served as the senior diplomat for 15 cycles, and in that time, she had learned much about the species called humans. Or so she thought. They had first made contact with Earth nearly 30 years ago. A human exploration vessel had wandered into space, and instead of conflict, both sides had chosen communication. The humans proved to be curious, eager to learn, and remarkably adaptable. Trade agreements followed. Cultural exchanges began. A lasting friendship formed between the two civilizations. Had personally met dozens of humans over the years. She had studied their language, their customs, their biology, and their history. She kept detailed files on everything she learned, and she shared this knowledge with the High Council whenever they requested it. According to her records, humans were a fascinating but physically unremarkable species. They were smaller than, with soft skin instead of scales. They lacked claws, fangs, or any natural weapons. Their bodies were fragile compared to most spacefaring races, and they tired easily in high-gravity environments. But what they lacked in physical strength, they made up for in other ways. Humans were patient negotiators who preferred words over violence. They had gentle voices and warm smiles. They showed deep empathy for other beings, often going out of their way to help strangers. They were nurturing by nature, caring for their young with remarkable dedication. Admired these qualities. She believed humans represented the best of what intelligent life could become: peaceful, compassionate, wise. What did not realize was that every human she had ever met shared something in common. Every ambassador, every scientist, every trader, every visitor who had crossed into space over the past 3 decades had been female. This was not entirely an accident. In the early days of contact, human diplomats had noticed something interesting about culture. They were a matriarchal society. Their leaders were female. Their scientists were female. Their warriors were female. Males existed in their species, but they played a much smaller role in public life. They expected other civilizations to operate the same way. Human leadership had made a calculated decision. To ensure smooth relations, they would send only female representatives to deal with the. It was a small adjustment, and it seemed to work well. They responded positively to human women. Trust grew between the two species. No one saw any reason to change the arrangement. Decades passed, and the policy remained in place. New diplomats received the same instructions as their predecessors. Only women traveled to space. The pattern continued so long that most humans forgot there had ever been a deliberate choice involved. And they never questioned what they saw. Why would they? Every human they met confirmed their understanding of the species. Humans were small, gentle, soft-spoken creatures. That was simply what they were. Walked away from the observation window and entered her private office. A message waited on her console, marked with the seal of the High Council. She activated the display and read the words carefully. The Council had made a decision. They wanted a permanent human presence aboard the vessel. Not just occasional visitors, but a full diplomatic team that would live and work alongside the crew. This was a significant step forward in relations between the two species. Earth had agreed to the request. A delegation of 3 would arrive on the next transport. Ambassador Lisa Monroe would lead the team. Her assistant would handle administrative duties. A security would complete the group, though the file on this third member had been delayed due to some kind of administrative error. did not worry about the missing information. Security personnel were standard on diplomatic missions. She assumed it would be another human woman, probably trained in conflict resolution and emergency protocols. Nothing unusual. She began preparing for the arrival. The vessel was an enormous ship, nearly 3 kilometers long. It served as a mobile capital, carrying the High Council and their staff across the collective's territory. Accommodating 3 small humans would present no difficulty. Personally oversaw the preparation of the guest quarters. She ordered soft lighting installed, knowing that humans preferred gentler illumination then. She adjusted the temperature controls to match human comfort levels. She selected calming colors for the walls and requested furniture built to human proportions. She even arranged for human food supplies to be stocked in a private kitchen. She had studied human dietary needs carefully, and she wanted her guests to feel welcome. The days passed quickly, reviewed her notes on human customs. She practiced human greetings with her staff. She reminded the crew to speak slowly and clearly, since the translation devices sometimes struggled with complex sentences. On the morning of the scheduled arrival, gathered her council in the receiving bay. 12 senior officials stood in formal positions, their scales polished to a high shine. This was an important moment in the history of their alliance with humanity. The transport docked with a gentle thud. Pressure equalized between the vessels. The airlock lights shifted from red to green. Straightened her posture and prepared her warmest smile. She had done this many times before. She knew exactly what to expect. The door slid open. Lisa Monroe stepped through first. She was exactly as her file described. Average height for a human female with brown hair pulled back in a neat style. Her eyes were dark and intelligent. She wore the formal clothing of a human ambassador, simple but elegant. She smiled at and offered a traditional human greeting. Returned the greeting smoothly. This was familiar ground. Followed her superior. She was younger with lighter hair and an eager expression. Her movements were quick and precise, the mark of an efficient assistant. She nodded respectfully to the gathered. Felt pleased. The humans looked exactly as she had expected. This transition would go smoothly. Then the third figure stepped through the airlock. Felt both of her hearts stop beating for just a moment. The creature that emerged from the transport was unlike any human she had ever seen. It stood much taller than the 2 females, towering over them by a significant margin. Its shoulders were broad, stretching the fabric of its uniform. Its chest was thick and muscular. Its arms hung at its sides, and noticed that its hands were large enough to wrap completely around a throat. Its face was different too. The jaw was wider, harder, covered in a light shadow of dark hair. The nose was larger. The brow was heavier. And when it opened its mouth to speak, the sound that emerged was deep and resonant, like distant thunder rolling across a plain. "Good morning," Danny Carter said. "Thank you for having us." Could not move. She could not speak. She could only stare at this impossible being, trying to reconcile what she saw with everything she believed she knew about humanity. The council members behind her shifted nervously. She could feel their confusion and fear through their shared neural link. Questions flooded through the connection. What is this? Is it dangerous? Why did no one warn us? Had no answers. She had thought she understood humans. She had studied them for years. She had written reports and given lectures and trained other diplomats based on her expertise. But she had never seen a human male before. And nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment. The silence in the receiving bay stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Stood frozen, her twin hearts pounding against her chest. The other officials remained perfectly still behind her, their scales flickering with shades of pale gray that indicated deep unease. Danny Carter seemed unaware of the effect he was having. He stood patiently at the airlock entrance, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. His expression was calm and open. He waited for someone to speak, to welcome him aboard, to give him some indication of what came next. Lisa Monroe noticed the tension immediately. She had been a diplomat for 15 years, and she understood body language across species. She recognized fear when she saw it, even on alien faces. She stepped forward smoothly, placing herself slightly between Danny and the officials. Her movement was subtle, but it drew their attention away from him and toward her. "Ambassador," Lisa said warmly, "it is wonderful to finally meet you in person. I have heard so much about your work. Your reputation for building bridges between species is known throughout the diplomatic community." The familiar pattern of polite conversation helped find her voice. She blinked several times and forced her posture to relax. "Ambassador Monroe," she replied, her words coming out more stiffly than she intended. "Welcome to Harmony Point Station. We are honored to receive you and your team." Her eyes drifted back to Danny as she spoke the last word. She could not help herself. He was simply too different, too unexpected, too large to ignore. Danny caught her gaze and offered a small nod of acknowledgement. The gesture was meant to be friendly, but felt her scales ripple with instinctive alarm. His eyes were steady and direct. There was something intense about his attention, something that made her feel like prey in the presence of a predator. She pushed the feeling aside. This was a human. Humans were peaceful. Humans were gentle. Whatever this male was, he belonged to the same species she had worked with for decades. She needed to remember that. "Please," said, gesturing toward the corridor beyond the receiving bay. "Allow me to show you to your quarters. You must be tired after your journey." The group moved through the station's gleaming halls. Crew members stopped and stared as they passed. Some pressed themselves against the walls to make room, their eyes wide with surprise. Others simply froze in place, watching Danny with expressions of disbelief. Danny noticed the reactions. He would have been blind not to, but he said nothing and kept walking at a steady pace, staying slightly behind Lisa, and he had dealt with fear before. He understood that some things took time. Led them to the guest quarters she had prepared. The rooms were beautiful by human standards, with soft beds and pleasant colors and gentle lighting. Lisa smiled with genuine appreciation when she saw them. "These are wonderful," she said. "You have clearly put great thought into our comfort, thank you." Accepted the compliment with a small bow. Then she turned to face the group more fully, her curiosity finally overwhelming her caution. "Forgive me," she said carefully, "but I must ask a question. I do not wish to cause offense, but I find myself confused." Lisa nodded encouragingly. "Please, ask whatever you need to ask. Honest communication is the foundation of good diplomacy." Looked at Danny. He met her gaze without flinching. "Your companion," said slowly. "He is different from other humans I have met. His size, his appearance, his voice. Is he the same species as you?" A brief silence followed the question. Looked down at the floor, clearly uncomfortable. Lisa maintained her diplomatic composure, but could see her choosing her words with care. "Yes," Lisa said finally. "Danny is human, the same as in myself. He is what we call a male of our species." Process this information. Male. The word existed in language, of course. Males existed in society, but males were smaller than females, quieter, more delicate. They stayed home and cared for children while females handled the work of civilization. This human male was the opposite of everything associated with the word. "I see," said, though she clearly did not see at all. "And males are common among your species." Lisa smiled gently. "Roughly half of all humans are male. We have equal numbers of each." Equal numbers. Half of all humans looked like this creature. Half of all humans carried that size, that strength, that rumbling voice. The thought made feel slightly dizzy. "Why," she asked, "have we never seen a human male before?" The question hung in the air. Lisa hesitated and sensed there was more to this story than simple chance. That was a diplomatic decision made many years ago, Lisa admitted. When our species first made contact, your representative seemed more comfortable dealing with human women. We wanted to respect your cultural preferences. Over time, the pattern simply continued. No one intended to deceive you. It was merely an attempt to build positive relations. Absorbed this explanation. It made a certain kind of sense. Humans were known for their sensitivity to other cultures. They adapted themselves to fit different situations. It was one of the qualities she admired about them. But it also meant that everything she thought she knew about humanity was incomplete. Half the species had been hidden from her. Half the picture had been missing all along. She looked at Danny again, studying him with new eyes. He stood quietly, letting the women do the talking. That, at least, seemed familiar. Males behaved the same way in formal situations. "May I speak?" Danny asked, his deep voice cutting through the silence. Jumped slightly at the sound. She had not expected him to address her directly. "Of course," she said, recovering quickly. "Please." Danny stepped forward. Despite his size, he moved smoothly, with a controlled grace that seemed at odds with his powerful frame. He stopped at a respectful distance, close enough to be heard clearly but far enough to avoid invading her personal space. "I understand this is strange for you," he said. "I can see that my presence makes you uncomfortable. I want you to know that I mean no harm to anyone here. My job is to protect Ambassador Monroe and her team. I am a guardian, not a threat." His words were simple and direct. There was no aggression in his tone, no challenge in his posture. He was simply stating facts, offering reassurance in the clearest terms possible. Felt some of her tension ease. This male might look intimidating, but his manner was calm and reasonable. Perhaps the differences were only surface deep. "Thank you for your words," she said. "I apologize if my reaction caused offense. The value honesty above all things. I will admit that your appearance surprised me greatly." Danny shrugged, a human gesture that had learned to interpret as casual acceptance. "No offense taken," he said. "Surprise is natural when you encounter something new. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. The more you understand, the more comfortable you will feel." Considered his offer. There were many questions burning in her mind, but this was not the time or place to explore them. The humans needed rest after their journey. Proper conversations could wait until later. "I appreciate your openness," she said formally. "For now, please rest and settle into your quarters. I will return this evening to escort you to a welcome dinner with the High Council." She paused, then added carefully, "Will all three of you be attending?" The question carried an unspoken concern. Was not sure how the High Council would react to Danny's presence. She was not sure how she would explain him to leaders who had never seen anything like him. Lisa understood the subtext immediately. "All three of us will attend," she said firmly. "Danny is an official member of our delegation. Where we go, he goes. That is not negotiable." Nodded slowly. She had expected that answer, even if she had hoped for a different one. "Very well," she said. "I will make the necessary arrangements." She left the guest quarters with her mind racing. The dinner was only a few hours away. She needed to contact the High Council and prepare them for what they were about to see. She needed to find the right words to explain this massive, powerful, impossible creature called a human male. She walked quickly through the corridors, passing crew members who still whispered and stared in the direction of the guest quarters. News traveled fast on a space station. By now, everyone would know that something unprecedented had arrived. Reached her office and sat heavily in her chair. She stared at the blank communication screen for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she began to compose the most difficult message of her diplomatic career. The High Council needed to know that everything they believed about humans was about to change. The first week aboard the vessel was difficult for everyone. Danny felt the fear that followed him wherever he went. It hung in the air like a cold mist. It showed in the way crew members pressed themselves against walls when he walked past. It echoed in the sudden silences that fell whenever he entered a room. He tried to make himself smaller. He walked with his shoulders slightly hunched. He kept his voice low and spoke only when spoken to. He avoided eye contact with who seemed particularly nervous around him. He did everything he could think of to appear less threatening. None of it worked. They could not stop themselves from reacting to his presence. Their instincts were too strong. Something about Danny triggered ancient warning signals in their biology, responses that had evolved over millions of years to protect them from predators. His size, his mass, his deep voice, his direct gaze, all of it combined to create a picture of danger that their conscious minds could not override. Danny understood. He had seen similar reactions before, though never this intense. Some species simply could not help their fear responses. It was not personal. It was not logical. It simply was. That understanding did not make it easier to bear. Lisa noticed how the situation weighed on him. She saw the way his shoulders slumped at the end of each day. She heard the tiredness in his voice when they spoke privately in the evenings. She watched him stare out the window at the stars, his expression unreadable. One night she sat down beside him in their common room. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly. Danny took a long time to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion. "I have been trained to handle hostile environments," he said. "Combat zones, dangerous negotiations, situations where my life might be at risk. None of that prepared me for this." Lisa waited for him to continue. "They look at me like I am a monster," Danny said. "Every single one of them, even the ones who try to hide it. I can see it in their eyes. They are afraid I am going to hurt them." "You would never hurt them," Lisa said firmly. "I know that, you know that, but they do not know that, and I do not know how to show them." Lisa had no easy answers. She was a diplomat, skilled at building bridges between cultures. But this situation was beyond anything in her experience. The fear was not based on misunderstanding or cultural differences. It was something deeper, something biological, something that words alone might not be able to fix. "Give it time," she said finally. "Keep doing what you are doing. Show them who you really are through your actions. That is all any of us can do." Danny nodded slowly. He did not look convinced, but he accepted her advice. What other choice did he have? The days continued to pass. Danny performed his duties with quiet professionalism. He stood guard during diplomatic meetings, positioning himself near the exits where he could watch for threats without looming over the officials. He reviewed security protocols and made suggestions for improving the station's defense systems. He maintained a careful distance from everyone except Lisa and they watched him constantly. They pretended not to, but Danny felt their eyes on him wherever he went. They studied his movements. They analyzed his behavior. They whispered among themselves when they thought he could not hear. Their conversations often reached him anyway. The translation devices were quite effective. "Look at the size of him," one engineer said to another. "He could tear through a bulkhead with his bare hands." "Did you see how fast he moved during the security drill?" a young crew member asked. "I have never seen anything react that quickly. It was terrifying." "The female humans seem so normal," an older official mused. "How can they share a species with that creature?" Danny heard it all. He absorbed the words without reaction, maintaining his professional composure. But each comment added weight to the burden he carried. One afternoon, a young named approached in the mess hall. Was smaller than most, with scales that shimmered in uncertain shades of green and gold. She worked as a junior researcher in the science division, and her curiosity often overwhelmed her caution. Looked up from her meal and smiled warmly. She had grown fond of over the past week. The young alien reminded her of a curious child, always asking questions, always wanting to learn more. "May I sit with you?" asked. "Of course," said, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. Settled into the chair, her tail curling around the base for balance. She glanced around the mess hall, checking to see who might be listening. When she was satisfied they were relatively alone, she leaned forward and spoke in a low voice. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Something important about the mail." Set down her eating utensil. She had expected this conversation would happen eventually. "Go ahead," she said. Hesitated. Her scales flickered with nervous colors. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Is he dangerous?" The question hung between them, considered how to answer. She could offer simple reassurance, the kind of diplomatic response that Lisa would give. She could say that Danny was perfectly safe, that there was nothing to worry about, that they had nothing to fear. But valued honesty, and she sensed that needed something more than empty comfort. "He can be," admitted. Pulled back slightly, her eyes widening with alarm. "But not to you," added quickly, "never to you." Blinked in confusion. "I do not understand. How can he be dangerous but not dangerous to us?" Thought carefully about how to explain. She needed to find words that it could understand, concepts that would translate across the gap between their species. "Think of it like a tool," she said finally. "A powerful tool that can be used in different ways. A cutting instrument can harvest food or cause injury. The tool itself is not good or evil. What matters is how it is used and who controls it." Listened intently, her head tilted to one side. "Danny has great strength," continued. "He is fast and powerful and trained for combat. Those abilities make him capable of causing serious harm. That is the truth, and I will not lie to you about it." She paused, making sure was following. "But Danny chooses how to use his strength. He chooses to protect people. He chooses to defend those who cannot defend themselves. He has dedicated his life to keeping others safe. That is who he is. That is the core of his character." Considered this explanation. Her scales shifted to more stable colors as she processed the information. "So his danger is pointed outward," she said slowly. "Toward threats, not toward those he protects." Smiled. "Exactly. You have nothing to fear from Danny. None of you do. He would throw himself between you and harm without a moment of hesitation. That is what human males do. That is what they have always done." Sat in silence for a long moment. Could see her thinking, turning over this new understanding in her mind. "Among the," said finally, "our males are smaller than females, weaker. They stay home and care for young while females handle dangerous work. We assumed all species worked this way." "Many species do," acknowledged. "But not all. Humans evolved differently. Our males developed strength and aggression for a specific purpose. They became protectors, guardians. They keep the family safe while others nurture and build." "That seems like a heavy burden," said. Nodded. "It is. Heavier than most people realize. Human males carry the weight of responsibility every day. They are expected to be strong, to be brave, to face danger without flinching. They are taught from childhood that their value comes from what they can protect." She glanced toward the door, as if she could see Danny through the walls. "And when people fear them instead of trusting them, when they are treated like threats instead of guardians, it hurts them deeply. Even if they never show it, even if they never complain." Followed's gaze. Something shifted in her expression. The fear did not disappear entirely, but it made room for something else. Something that looked almost like sympathy. "I think I understand a little better now," said quietly. Reached across the table and touched the young's hand gently. "Understanding is always the first step," she said. "What comes next is up to you." Nodded slowly. She rose from her seat and walked toward the door, but before she left the mess hall, she paused and looked back. "Thank you," she said, "for being honest with me." Then she was gone. Sat alone with her thoughts. She hoped her words would help. She hoped would share what she had learned with others. She hoped that slowly, gradually, they would begin to see Danny for what he truly was. But she also knew that hope was not enough. Sooner or later, Danny would need to prove himself through action. She just did not know what form that proof would take. The attack came without warning. Harmony Point Station was conducting a routine resupply operation when the first alarm began to scream. The sound cut through the corridors like a blade, sharp and urgent, and impossible to ignore. Was in the council chamber when it happened, meeting with Lisa to discuss trade negotiations. Sat nearby, taking notes on a portable device. Danny stood near the main door, his eyes constantly scanning the room out of habit. The alarm made everyone freeze. "What is that?" Lisa asked, rising from her seat. Scales had gone pale with sudden fear. She recognized that particular alarm. Every did. "Breach," she whispered. "Hull breach, we are being boarded." Danny was already moving. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pressed his hand against the door control panel. The display showed a map of the station, with red warning lights spreading across the outer sections. Said, her voice shaking, "It must be they have been raiding our shipping lanes for months. We thought this station was too well defended." Danny did not need to hear the rest. He understood the situation immediately. Hostile aliens were boarding the station. The people in this room were in danger. Everything else was irrelevant. "Is there a way to seal this section?" he asked. Nodded and hurried to a control console. Her fingers moved across the surface, activating emergency protocols. Heavy doors began closing throughout the station, dividing it into isolated segments. "That will slow them down," she said, "but it will not stop them. Warriors can cut through standard bulkheads in minutes." Danny turned to Lisa. "Stay here with Ambassador. Keep everyone calm. Move anyone in the outer rooms to this chamber. It is the most defensible position." Lisa grabbed his arm. "What are you going to do?" Danny looked toward the door. Through the thick metal they could already hear distant sounds, screaming, energy weapons discharging, the thunder of heavy footsteps running through corridors. "My job," he said simply. He moved to the storage locker near the door and retrieved his standard sidearm. It was a compact weapon, designed for defensive situations. Not ideal for combat, but better than nothing. Then he looked around the room and spotted a heavy metal chair bolted to the floor near the conference table. He wrapped his hands around the base and pulled. The bolts groaned, resisted, and finally tore free from the deck plating. Danny hefted the chair experimentally, testing its weight and balance. Watched in stunned silence. She had never seen anyone tear furniture from the floor with bare hands. "Stay inside," Danny said to the room. "No matter what you hear, do not open this door for anyone except me." He stepped into the corridor, and the door sealed behind him. The sounds of combat grew louder as Danny moved toward the outer sections. He passed crew members running in the opposite direction, their faces masks of terror. He gestured for them to keep moving, to get to safety, to leave the fighting to him. He reached the first sealed bulkhead and checked the display. The breach was 3 sections ahead. Warriors had cut their way in and were advancing toward the command areas. Danny took a deep breath. He had been trained for combat. He had faced hostile situations before, but he had never fought alone against an unknown number of enemies with nothing but a sidearm and a metal chair. It did not matter. There were people behind him who could not defend themselves. That was all the motivation he needed. He overrode the bulkhead controls and stepped through. The corridor beyond was chaos. Smoke filled the air from damaged systems. Emergency lights flickered red and white, and at the far end Danny saw them. There were reptilian creatures, tall and muscular, with armored scales and serrated blades built into their forearms. They moved in a pack, 6 of them, their yellow eyes scanning for prey. They spotted Danny at the same moment he spotted them. For a single heartbeat, Both sides froze. They had expected frightened, soft creatures that would flee or surrender. They had not expected this tall, broad figure standing alone in their path, holding a weapon in one hand and a metal chair in the other. Then the lead let out a war cry and charged. Danny raised his sidearm and fired. The first shot caught in the shoulder, spinning it sideways but not stopping its advance. The second shot hit center mass and dropped it to the deck. The remaining 5 did not hesitate. They surged forward as a group, their bladed arms raised to strike. Danny met them head-on. He swung the metal chair in a wide arc, catching the first attacker across the face. The impact sent the flying into the wall with a crack of breaking bone. Danny followed through with the momentum, bringing the chair around for another swing. The second ducked under the blow and slashed at Danny's side. He twisted away, but not fast enough. The serrated blade cut through his uniform and into his flesh. Blood began to flow immediately. Danny ignored the pain. He dropped low and drove his shoulder into this chest, lifting it off its feet and slamming it into the deck. Before it could recover, he brought the chair down on its skull. 3 enemies remained. They circled him now, more cautious after seeing their companions fall. Danny stood in the center of the corridor, bleeding from his side, breathing hard but steady. He held the dented chair ready and watched them move. One fainted from the left. Danny turned to face it, and the other 2 attacked from behind. He felt the blades pierce his back and side. Pain exploded through his body. He staggered but did not fall. With a roar that echoed through the corridor, Danny spun and swung the chair with all his remaining strength. The impact crushed the chest of one attacker. He dropped the ruined chair and grabbed another by the throat, lifting it off the ground with one hand while punching it repeatedly with the other. The last standing hesitated. It had expected an easy raid. It had not expected this creature that refused to die, that kept fighting through wounds that should have been fatal, that seemed powered by something beyond mere physical strength. Danny dropped the unconscious body in his grip and turned to face the final enemy. "Run," he said, his voice a graveled rasp. They did not need to be told twice. It turned and fled back toward the breach, desperate to escape this impossible human. Danny did not pursue. His legs finally gave out and he collapsed against the corridor wall, sliding down to sit on the blood-stained deck. He pressed his hand against the worst of his wounds and tried to slow his breathing. Behind him, he heard the bulkhead door opening. Station security had finally arrived, a dozen in combat gear rushing down the corridor. They stopped short when they saw the carnage. 7 bodies, 1 human slumped against the wall, surrounded by his fallen enemies. The security commander approached slowly, her weapon lowered. She stared at Danny with an expression caught somewhere between horror and awe. The council chamber," Danny managed to say, "is everyone." "Everyone is safe," the commander replied. You stopped them all by yourself." Danny nodded weakly. That was all that mattered. The job was done. Footsteps rang down the corridor as Lisa and pushed through the security cordon. Lisa dropped to her knees beside Danny, her hands pressing against his wounds, her face white with fear. "Medic," she screamed. "We need a medic now." Danny looked up at her with tired eyes. Despite everything, he managed a small smile. "Everyone okay?" he asked. Lisa laughed through her tears. Of course that would be his first question. Even now, bleeding from a dozen wounds, he was still thinking about others instead of himself. "Everyone is okay," she said, "because of you." Danny let his head fall back against the wall. The world was starting to go fuzzy around the edges. He could feel his strength fading, his consciousness slipping away. But he had done his job. He had kept them safe. That was enough. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was face, peering down at him with scales that no longer showed fear. They showed something else entirely. Danny spent 3 weeks in the medical bay. The wounds he had suffered would have killed most beings. The physicians said so repeatedly, shaking their heads in amazement as they worked to repair the damage. Human doctors were brought in from the nearest Earth outpost to assist with the treatment, and even they seemed surprised by the extent of his injuries. 12 separate wounds, 3 cracked ribs, massive blood loss, internal damage that required multiple surgeries to correct. And yet Danny survived. His body fought back with a resilience that they had never observed in their studies of humanity. His bones began to knit faster than expected. His flesh started to heal almost visibly from day to day. His vital signs grew stronger with each passing hour. The chief physician, an elderly female named, spent long hours studying Danny's recovery. She had been practicing medicine for over 60 years, and she had never seen anything quite like this. "His body is designed for damage," she told during one of their conversations. "His muscles, his bones, his healing systems, they are all built to absorb punishment and recover quickly. It is as if his species evolved specifically to endure violence." Stood beside Danny's bed, watching him sleep. The fear she had once felt in his presence was gone completely. It had been replaced by something far more complicated. "He nearly died saving us," she said quietly. "He barely knew us. He knew we were afraid of him, and still he put himself between us and death." Nodded slowly. "That is what I cannot understand. From a biological perspective, self-sacrifice makes no sense. Survival of the individual should be the primary drive, but this male was willing to die for strangers who feared him." "Perhaps that is the point," said. "Perhaps that is why human males evolved as they did, not to be predators, but to be protectors." Danny's eyes opened slowly. He had been drifting in and out of consciousness for days, but this time his gaze seemed clear and focused. He looked up at and managed a weak smile. "Still here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Felt her heart's lift at the sound. "Yes, you are still here. Against all expectations, you are still here." She pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down. She had visited him every day since the attack, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply watching over him as he slept. The crew had noticed. They had talked. "I need to thank you," said. "What you did was extraordinary. You saved my life. You saved the lives of everyone in that council chamber. You stopped an attack that could have killed dozens of my people." Danny shook his head slightly. "Just doing my job." "No," said firmly. "It was more than that. I have seen beings do their jobs. I have seen soldiers and guards and security personnel carry out their duties. What you did went beyond duty. You fought through wounds that should have stopped you. You refused to fall when your body was failing. You kept fighting until every threat was eliminated." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do it? You knew we feared you. You knew we looked at you like a monster. You had every reason to resent us. Why did you sacrifice yourself for people who treated you with suspicion and distrust?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, as if he was thinking through each one carefully. "Where I come from," he said, "we have a saying. The measure of a person is not how they treat those who love them. It is how they treat those who fear them." Listened intently. "You feared me because you did not understand me. That is natural. That is reasonable. Fear of the unknown is one of the oldest instincts in the universe. I could not blame you for something you could not control." He shifted slightly in the bed, wincing at the movement. "But your fear did not make you less worthy of protection. It did not make your lives less valuable. You were still people. You still deserve to be safe. And I had the power to keep you safe." His eyes met hers directly. "That is what power is for. Not for domination. Not for control. Power exists so that those who have it can protect those who do not. That is the duty that comes with strength. That is the responsibility that human males carry from the day we are born." sat back in her chair, absorbing his words. Everything she had believed about human males, about strength, about the nature of power itself, was shifting in her mind. "We thought your size meant violence," she admitted. "We thought your strength made you a threat." Danny smiled gently. "I understand. Many species think that way. They see power and assume it will be used against them. They cannot imagine strength being used in service of the weak." "But that is exactly what you are," said slowly. "You are strength in service of the weak. You are power dedicated to protection." Danny nodded. "That is what I try to be. That is what all the best human males try to be. We do not always succeed. We are not perfect, but that is the ideal we aim for." Reached out and touched his hand gently. It was the first time she had voluntarily made physical contact with him. His skin was warm beneath her scales. "Thank you," she said, "for teaching me something I should have learned long ago." Over the following days, Danny continued to recover. He began sitting up in bed, then standing with assistance, then walking short distances through the medical bay. The staff watched his progress with open amazement. Word of his sacrifice had spread throughout the station. Everyone knew what he had done. Everyone knew how many he had faced alone. Everyone knew the price he had paid in blood and pain. The fear that had surrounded him melted away like ice in sunlight. Young started bringing him meals personally, sitting beside his bed and asking endless questions about human culture and history. Engineers came to visit, offering thanks and small gifts from there. Children on the station gathered outside the medical bay, hopping to catch a glimpse of the hero who had saved them. Danny accepted all of this attention with quiet grace. He never boasted about what he had done. He never asked for recognition or reward. He simply smiled, answered questions patiently, and expressed gratitude for the kindness shown to him. Observed these interactions and felt something she had not expected: pride. She was proud of this human male, proud to know him, proud to call him an ally. When Danny was finally cleared to leave the medical bay, he resumed his duties with the delegation. But everything was different now. Crew members nodded to him in the corridors. They met his eyes without flinching. They spoke to him directly, asking for his opinions, seeking his advice. He was no longer a threat. He was a protector. He was theirs. Drafted a new report for the High Council. She worked on it for days, choosing each word with care. When it was finished, she transmitted it to every vessel in the collective. The report began with an admission of error. "For 30 years we believed we understood humanity. We were wrong. We saw only half the picture. We knew their females, their diplomats, their scholars. We thought we knew the species, but we did not know their males." She described Danny in detail: his size, his strength, his capacity for violence. She held nothing back. She wanted her people to understand exactly what a human male could do. Then she described what he had done with that power. Human males carry the capacity for tremendous destruction. Their bodies are weapons. Their instincts are honed for combat. They could dominate other species through force alone if they chose to do so. But they choose differently. They choose restraint. They choose protection. They choose to stand between danger and those they guard. They absorb harm so that others do not have to. When our station was attacked, this male threw himself into battle against overwhelming odds. He fought through wounds that would have killed any of us. He refused to fall until every threat was eliminated. He nearly died protecting people who had feared him. That is the truth of human males. They are not gentle, they are not soft, but they are good. Their strength is not a threat to those they protect. It is a gift. It is a shield. The final lines of the report became famous throughout the collective. To see a human male stand between you and danger is to understand why humanity has survived against all odds. It is to witness love expressed through sacrifice. It is to know, in the deepest part of yourself, that you are safe. We had never seen a human male before. Now we have. and our perception of humanity has changed forever. The alliance between the collective and Earth grew stronger in the years that followed. Human males began appearing in diplomatic delegations, in trade missions, in scientific exchanges. The welcomed them with open arms. Danny Carter served as security for another decade. He trained new officers, both human and. He became known across the collective as a teacher, a mentor, and a friend. And whenever Young asked him about that day on the station, about the battle that changed everything, he always gave the same answer. "I just did my job," he would say with a modest shrug. "I kept people safe. That is what we are for." But the who had witnessed his sacrifice knew better. They knew that Danny Carter had done far more than his job. He had shown them what a human male truly was. And they would never forget.